Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are dissecting an ancient piece of literature that is honestly just absolutely vibrating with tension. We're looking at Psalm 2. Now, I know it's incredibly easy to dismiss ancient texts like this as, just dusty historical relics or simple religious poetry, but when you actually sit down and break this apart, what we really have here is a masterclass in narrative structure. It is an incredibly dynamic, brilliantly structured four-act drama all about power, rebellion, and ultimate submission. It's the kind of text that masterfully shifts perspectives, literally jumping from the chaotic noise of earth straight up into the throne room of heaven. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how it builds that narrative using the source text itself. Let's get into it.
So let's just jump right in with the exact provocative question that opens our text. Why do the nations rage? Notice how it doesn't start with some gentle, slow-paced introduction, right? No, it drops us directly into the middle of a conflict. It's this explosive opening line that immediately demands our attention and sets the stage for the whole dramatic narrative that's about to unfold. The author is basically looking out at a world completely in turmoil and asking a fundamental, almost exasperated question about human rebellion. To see exactly how this plays out, let's look directly at the source document. If you read through verses 2 through 10, you can naturally see how the poem breaks down into four really distinct voices. Actually, it's a lot like a four-act play. Each act shifts the camera angle, giving us a completely different perspective on this massive, central conflict between earthly power and divine authority. Act 1, the nation's rebellion. So imagine our camera is right down on the ground level, stuck right in the thick of a chaotic, incredibly tense gathering of earthly kings. Now, what is really fascinating here is the sheer kinetic energy of the language. Look at these aggressive action verbs straight from the text. The nations rage. They plot in vain. The kings set themselves. The rulers take counsel together. It paints a very vivid picture of frantic, aggressive plotting, doesn't it? But catch that little phrase there, in vain. Literally right from the jump, the text is telling us that all of this massive, coordinated earthly effort, all this raging and conspiring by the most powerful people on the planet is, at the end of the day, totally pointless.
And here is what those earthly rulers are actually saying. This is the collective voice of the nations in verse 3. Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. It's a visceral, violent demand for total independence. They clearly view the authority of the Lord and His anointed as these restrictive bonds and cords just tying them down. They don't want to just politely disagree. They are actively seeking to violently break free and cast off, literally, any ultimate authority over their lives and kingdoms.
Which brings us to Act 2, the divine response. Here, the perspective dramatically shifts. We go from the dust and noise of this earthly rebellion straight up to the throne of heaven.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core thematic contrast of the whole poem. On one hand, you've got earthly frustration, sweating, plotting, raging kings. But the heavenly reaction? He who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord holds them in derision. I mean, wow, there's no panic at all. Just a calm, almost mocking reaction to the absolute absurdity of finite earthly kings trying to overthrow the infinite creator. It's like watching a toddler try to wrestle a bulldozer. But, as you might expect, that laughter quickly turns serious. The text tells us that he speaks to them in his wrath and terrifies them in his fury. And then we get this definitive statement, cutting right through all that earthly plotting. As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. It is literally the ultimate mic drop. Despite all the raging and all the plotting of the nations, the divine will is already a done deal. The true king is already installed on the holy hill. So the rebellion isn't just futile, it's already defeated.
Moving right along to Act 3, the royal decree. A brand new voice enters the narrative here, the newly installed anointed king.
And here is exactly what he says. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. So the crucial takeaway here is that the anointed king is validating his own position by recounting a direct conversation with the Lord. He's using this divine endorsement, this formal adoption as the son, to prove that his authority isn't just something he made up. It comes directly from the highest possible power. And then the Lord promises him that the nations, yes, the very same nations currently rebelling, will be his heritage, and the ends of the earth will be his possession.
So what is he authorized to do with those rebellious nations? Well, the text absolutely does not hold back. It says he shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Just let that severe, violent imagery sink in for a second. It's a promise of absolute, unyielding destruction for those who refuse to submit. Think about it. A fragile potter's clay vessel struck by a solid iron rod doesn't just crack, it completely shatters, utterly beyond repair. And that is the promised consequence of the earthly rebellion we saw back in Act 1.
Finally, we reach Act 4, the final warning. The perspective shifts one last time, taking on a tone of urgent, direct advice for those same plotting earthly rulers.
Grounding ourselves back in the source text for these last few verses, you can see the poem attempt to resolve all this incredible built-up tension by demanding a critical choice. The decree has been read, the threat of the iron rod is basically lingering in the air, and now the text offers a very stark ultimatum.
Let's break down the specific instructions they're given to avoid this destruction. The text says, "Be wise, be warned, serve the Lord with fear." And then we have this really fascinating, honestly kind of paradoxical command, "Rejoice with trembling." It so perfectly captures the dual reality of encountering this kind of immense power, right? There is genuine joy in aligning with the winning side, but there is also an absolute reverence and fear of that authority. Finally, they are commanded to kiss the sun. This was an ancient gesture of deep homage and submission, and the text makes it clear, if they don't do this, his wrath is quickly kindled and they will, quote, perish in the way.
But the text doesn't actually end on a note of wrath. It ends with a really profound twist. The very final line is, "Blessed are all who take refuge in him." It perfectly contrasts that earlier terrifying promise of being shattered by an iron rod with this final, peaceful promise of blessing and safety. The very king they were trying so desperately to violently break away from, he is ultimately presented as the only safe place to hide.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to ponder. The text flawlessly flips its message from those ancient kings directly to us, the readers. It presents a world in total chaos, a firm, unshakable divine authority, and a choice. So, looking back at the structure of this incredible ancient drama, the ultimate question it forces us to ask is simply this: when the nations rage, where do you take refuge? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.